It all started over a parking violation. At least that's what they told my grandpa when these so-called HOA cops showed up. Just a small mistake. But when they shoved him and his arm snapped on the concrete, I knew I couldn't let this slide. My cousins, all U.S. Army vets, came home for one thing: revenge. But trust me, it wasn't just about payback. It was about taking down people who thought they could push others around. This is the real story of how we turn the tables. So, what would you do if someone hurt your family over a ridiculous rule? Drop a comment below. Let's talk about it. The peace of our neighborhood shattered the moment Catherine moved in. I was standing in the driveway when she showed up, pointing at Grandpa's truck, accusing him of parking wrong in his own garage. I knew this wasn't going to end well. I'm Josh, 25 years old, living with my grandpa Frank in a suburban Texas neighborhood that used to be peaceful. Used to be. Grandpa Frank is a retired Air Force veteran, 70 years old, but still tough as nails, and keeps our house so immaculate you could eat off the sidewalk. Catherine, 50 years old, with bleached blonde hair like a Barbie doll, but the personality of a witch who had been denied her morning coffee for a week straight. She claimed to be the president of our homeowners association and had two men always following her around like lost puppies. Randy, a big guy who seemed uncomfortable with the whole thing, constantly shifting his weight, like he'd rather be anywhere else. And Bob, who didn't appear to be the sharpest tool in the shed, always nodding along to whatever Catherine said like a bobblehead doll. All three called themselves HOA enforcement officers. Looking back, I should have known right then that something was seriously wrong with this whole setup. Catherine created insane regulations that made zero sense to anyone with half a brain. Grass couldn't be taller than 2 inches, which meant you had to mow every other day during growing season. Trash cans had to be placed exactly 18 inches from the sidewalk, measured with an actual ruler she carried around like some kind of sidewalk dictator. Cars couldn't be parked in your own driveway for more than 6 consecutive hours, which I still don't understand, because who times their own parking? House paint colors had to be chosen from only 7 approved colors, all variations of beige that looked like different shades of depression. Every neighbor was terrified of her because she could fine people up to $500 for each violation. I wasn't sure if I was overreacting when I first heard about these rules, but $500 for parking in your own driveway for 7 hours instead of 6. That can't be right, can it? The whole neighborhood walked on eggshells around her, and honestly, I was starting to think maybe we should just ignore her completely. Maybe I should have just minded my own business, I don't know, but watching people live in fear in their own homes didn't sit right with me. Catherine appeared with Randy and Bob, accusing Grandpa of parking wrong in his own garage. Her voice was high-pitched, as though she had all the power in the world. She pointed at Grandpa Frank's truck, which was perfectly legally parked in our garage with maybe 2 inches of the front bumper visible past the garage door line. The front tire of your truck is touching the public sidewalk. This is a serious violation of HOA Code, Section 12-3. Seriously, did she really say that out loud? I actually had to stop and stare at her after that one, because the audacity was breathtaking. I snapped back at her. Your so-called rules don't apply here, Catherine, and you have no right to come into my garage. Grandpa Frank stepped outside, calmly explaining in that patient voice he uses when he's trying not to lose his temper. My truck is parked in my own garage. There's nothing wrong with it. Catherine's face turned red like a tomato that had been left in the sun too long. Don't argue with me. I'm the HOA president. She turned to Randy with this look that could have melted steel. Handle this. Randy looked at Grandpa Frank, seeming reluctant to cause trouble with an elderly man who clearly wasn't doing anything wrong. Sir, could you maybe back the truck up a little bit? Looking back, I still can't believe I didn't step in right then. I already told you the truck is parked correctly, Grandpa Frank repeated, and I could hear that edge creeping into his voice that meant his patience was running out fast. Catherine gritted her teeth like she was trying to crack walnuts with her jaw. Randy, I said handle this. Get him out of here. My legs felt like stone. I couldn't move, couldn't process what was happening. Was this real? Did she really just send her goons after my grandfather over this? Randy hesitated for maybe 3 seconds, looking between Catherine and Grandpa Frank. But under Catherine's pressure, and probably the promise of his $200 monthly paycheck, he shoved Grandpa Frank hard in the chest. My 70-year-old grandfather couldn't keep his balance and crashed backward into the concrete wall of our garage. The sickening crack of breaking bone echoed so clearly I can still hear it when I close my eyes. Grandpa Frank collapsed onto the driveway, clutching his arm and making this sound I'd never heard him make before, this quiet whimpering that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. Catherine and her two goons panicked faster than cockroaches when the lights come on and quickly fled the scene without checking if Grandpa was okay or calling for help. I immediately called 911, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hit the right numbers. While waiting for the paramedics, Grandpa Frank lay on the ground, his face pale with pain, but still trying to be the strong one. "Son, don't do anything reckless." Even with a broken arm, he was trying to protect me from making a mistake I'd regret. At the hospital, the doctor confirmed Grandpa had a broken arm and would need a cast for 6 weeks. As I sat beside his hospital bed, watching my grandfather lying there helplessly with machines beeping around him, a rage like I'd never felt before surged through me. Not explosive anger, but cold, calculating fury that settled into my bones like winter. In that moment, I wasn't sure if I was overreacting or if this was the beginning of something much worse. But one thing was clear: Catherine had just crossed a line. But it wasn't just the assault that angered me. That night, Catherine sent a text message. "This is what happens when you don't respect authority." I held my phone shaking, already planning my next move. It was war now, and I wasn't backing down. I dialed my cousin's number with fingers that were still shaking from rage. "Grayson, I need you in Texas. Someone hurt Grandpa Frank." When I hung up, I looked out the window and saw Catherine standing by her car across the street, smiling smugly toward the hospital like she'd just won some kind of victory. 3 days later, my cousins from Fort Hood arrived, Grayson, Finn, and Phoenix, each one carrying the weight of years of military experience. Grayson barely finished the footage before he was on the phone, already making calls to get more intel. "We move fast," he said. "This is personal now." Grayson, 30 years old, is a staff sergeant with 10 years of military experience and the kind of calm intensity that makes you understand why people follow his orders without question. Finn, 28 years old, is a specialist in communications and technology who can make computers do things I didn't even know were possible. Phoenix, 26 years old, has a background in psychological operations and this way of looking at people like he can see straight through their lies to whatever they're trying to hide. They weren't violent men, but they had one unbreakable rule that had gotten them through deployments in Afghanistan and family gatherings in Texas: family first always. When they saw Grandpa Frank with his arm in a cast, sitting in his favorite chair, but looking smaller somehow, nobody said a word for a long minute. But I could see how they clenched their jaws, how they exchanged those looks that said everything without saying anything. These were men who had fought actual enemies overseas, and they wouldn't let anyone touch their family without consequences. I wasn't sure if I should feel relieved or terrified, but honestly, having an army behind me felt better than facing Catherine alone. The atmosphere in the room shifted from grief to something much more dangerous. Suddenly, I wasn't the helpless guy I'd been when Grandpa was hurt. I was someone who had an army behind him, and revenge tasted sweeter than I ever imagined. Grayson watched the footage, his face growing darker with each replay, while Finn hacked into Catherine's communications, pulling up her every move. Clear assault and battery. In Texas, attacking someone over 65 automatically makes this a felony, carrying 2 to 20 years in prison. The way he said it, calm and factual, made it sound like Catherine had just signed her own death warrant. Finn paused, eyes wide. "Grayson, you're not going to believe this. Catherine isn't the president. She's been forging signatures." Just like that, our plan went from petty revenge to something much, much bigger. We all turned to look at Finn because that didn't make sense at the time. How could she not be the president when she'd been acting like she owned the entire neighborhood? She's just a board member who has been forging the president's signature on all these violation notices. Phoenix nodded with this satisfied smile that probably meant bad news for Catherine. "So, we have assault, fraud, and impersonating an official, but if we just go straight to court, they might get plea deals and light sentences." Looking back, I should have known they were planning something bigger than just filing a police report. These guys didn't do anything halfway. Grayson's voice was firm, but Phoenix shook his head. "The law moves too slow. If we want Catherine to feel the heat, we need to bring the heat." Finn shook his head like he was rejecting a bad military plan. "No offense, bro, but the law moves slow. These people need to understand what they've done. I say we make them sweat first." Phoenix agreed with that calculating look in his eyes. Psychological pressure first. Make them turn on each other, then hit them with legal action when they're weak. Listening to them debate strategy like they were planning a military operation, for the first time since Grandpa got hurt, I didn't feel powerless anymore. Having an army behind me changed everything, and I could feel my confidence coming back like blood flowing back into a limb that had been numb. Grayson finally nodded after considering all the angles. Fine, we do this smart. 3 phases: intelligence gathering, psychological operations, and legal execution. I'm not even sure why, but hearing them use military terminology to plan Catherine's downfall felt incredibly satisfying. Maybe it was because they treated this with the same seriousness they'd give an actual enemy threat. Finn opened his laptop and started pulling up screens I couldn't even identify. Phase 1. I'll hack into their communications, find out who's really in charge, what their weaknesses are, Phoenix said with that smile that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. Phase 2. I'll create psychological pressure, make them paranoid, make them question each other. Grayson concluded like he was briefing a mission. Phase 3, when they're fractured and vulnerable, we hit them with everything we've got legally. I looked at my 3 cousins planning Catherine's destruction with military precision, and for the first time in days, I smiled. What do you need me to do? Grayson looked at me with the kind of respect he usually reserved for fellow soldiers. You stay clean. We handle the dirty work. When this is over, you'll have justice and your conscience will be clear. Maybe I should have felt bad about what we were planning. I don't know. But watching Catherine hurt Grandpa Frank had burned away any sympathy I might have had for her. Finn had already started working his fingers flying across the keyboard, like he was defusing a bomb. Catherine's been embezzling HOA funds to pay Randy and Bob $200 each per month to play fake cops. She's also been forging documents for 6 months. Phoenix leaned toward the screen with professional interest. Perfect. Greed and deception. Those are psychological pressure points we can exploit. It didn't make sense at the time how excited he seemed about Catherine's crimes, but I was starting to understand that my cousin saw this as more than just family revenge. This was about stopping a bully who had been hurting innocent people for months. Grayson stood up with that command presence that made you want to salute even when you were in civilian clothes. Gentlemen, Catherine wanted to play authority figure. Let's show her what real authority looks like. Grayson paused, then leaned forward with that cold, calculating look he always had before a mission. We're doing this smart. We hit them where it hurts the most. They won't see us coming. Finn hacked into their system and sent out absurd new rules that had the whole neighborhood questioning Catherine's sanity. Suddenly, she wasn't the boss anymore. New HOA regulations effective immediately. All residents must walk counterclockwise when entering or leaving the neighborhood. Green decorations are banned as they disrupt community feng shui. Trash cans must be rotated exactly 45 degrees at 6 a.m. daily. I actually had to stop and stare at him after he sent that, because the rules were so ridiculous I couldn't believe anyone would take them seriously. The chaos erupted so fast that Catherine didn't know where to turn. Neighbors were already sending her angry texts, and she called the police. But none of them could stop the storm we'd unleashed. Neighbors started calling Catherine's phone non-stop. What the hell are these new rules? Walk counterclockwise. Are you insane? Catherine was completely confused because she had no idea where these emails were coming from. I didn't send any new rules. I don't know what you're talking about. But the email was sent from the official HOA account with a signature that looked identical to hers, so nobody believed her denials. I wasn't sure if I should feel guilty about the confusion we were causing, but watching Catherine scramble to explain rules she didn't create felt like the first taste of justice we'd gotten since Grandpa's arm got broken. The irony was perfect because she'd been making up fake rules for months. The moment Catherine realized she was losing control, she called in a private investigator, but she didn't know we were already 5 steps ahead. Her every move was being tracked. Catherine's calm facade cracked as the neighborhood bombarded her with complaints about the fake rules. The power she'd so carefully built was slipping, and I could feel the satisfaction building up inside me. She installed security cameras everywhere around her house, even hired a private investigator to find out who was sabotaging her HOA authority. When neighbors complained about the crazy regulations, she became defensive and started snapping at people who had been afraid of her for months. I don't know who's doing this, but I'll find out, and when I do, they're going to pay. She called the police 3 times in 2 days, but officers just shook their heads and told her the same thing each time. Ma'am, we can't investigate fake HOA rules. This isn't a police matter. I marched up to Catherine as she yelled at the elderly neighbor. "Enough of your games," I shouted. "You won't terrorize anyone else here." From my window, I watched Catherine arguing with an elderly neighbor about why she wasn't walking counterclockwise when she came back from checking her mailbox. I sipped my coffee with a slight smile appearing on my lips for the first time since this whole mess started. This wasn't the angry Josh anymore, who wanted to punch someone after watching his grandfather get hurt. This was Josh watching his plan unfold with the kind of satisfaction that comes from seeing a bully finally get confused and frustrated instead of being the one doing the confusing and frustrating. Looking back, I still can't believe how quickly Catherine's confidence crumbled when she lost control of the narrative. Phoenix's message to Randy wasn't just about creating doubt. It was designed to make him believe Catherine was going to throw him under the bus. What we didn't expect was just how fast it would unravel. He sent an anonymous email to Randy that was designed to plant seeds of doubt. "Catherine is planning to throw you under the bus for the assault. She's already talked to a lawyer about claiming you acted without her authorization. Watch your back." Randy panicked immediately and called Catherine, his voice tight with worry. "Did you really talk to a lawyer about me?" Catherine, who was already stressed about the fake rules and the investigator and the angry neighbors, snapped back without thinking. "What? No. I mean, we might need legal protection if this gets worse, but if what gets worse, if you throw me under the bus like that email said you would, Randy, calm down. We're in this together." But Randy didn't calm down, and his voice got louder with each word. "Are we? Because it sounds like you're already planning to blame everything on me and Bob." This was exactly the reaction Phoenix had predicted, and I had to admit watching Catherine's fake authority team turn on each other was more satisfying than I'd expected. Maybe I should have felt bad about manipulating them. I don't know, but they'd hurt my grandfather over a parking violation that wasn't even real. The psychological warfare was working better than anyone could have imagined. Meanwhile, Bob was having his own crisis at Murphy's bar downtown, drinking heavily and letting guilt eat him alive. He'd been going there every night since the incident, and the bartender told me later that Bob couldn't stop talking about what happened. "I heard an old man for money. Catherine pays me $200 a month to pretend to be HOA security, but we're not real security. We're just bullies. The old guy's in the hospital because of me, and I can't sleep." Unfortunately for Bob, but fortunately for us, Savannah was sitting in a nearby booth and heard everything. Savannah had lived in the neighborhood for 5 years and had been one of Catherine's favorite targets because she kept her house painted yellow instead of one of the approved beige shades. She approached Bob with her phone recording, which she later told me she'd started doing automatically whenever she heard Catherine's name mentioned anywhere. "My grandfather was a veteran too. You should be ashamed of yourself." Bob looked up with tears in his eyes and beer on his breath. "I am ashamed. I keep seeing his face when he hit that wall, the sound his arm made when it broke. I can't get it out of my head." I wasn't sure if I should trust Bob's sudden conscience or if this was just alcohol talking, but Savannah's recording was about to change everything in ways we never expected. The next morning, Savannah knocked on our door with her phone and a look of determination I'd never seen before. "Josh, I think you need to hear this." When she played Bob's confession, I heard him admit everything. The fake HOA enforcement, the monthly payments, how Catherine directed them to handle people who didn't comply with her made-up rules. "This is gold," Finn said, immediately copying the file to his laptop. "But we need more evidence to make sure this sticks in court." Savannah smiled like someone who had been waiting months for this opportunity. "Actually, I have more. My grandfather taught me to always be prepared for people like Catherine." She pulled out another recording from the same night. This is Catherine admitting to forging HOA documents and embezzling funds. In this recording, Catherine's voice was crystal clear and slightly drunk. "I just sign the president's name on whatever I want. Who's going to check?" The real president's been in assisted living for months, and paying those two idiots $200 each from the repair fund keeps them loyal and stupid. Grayson whistled low and impressed. "That's fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. She's looking at serious prison time." As Catherine stumbled over her own lies, a sense of power surged within me. But the real game was just beginning. We weren't going to stop until we brought her to her knees. Savannah played Bob's full confession, and I heard every detail of their fake HOA operation laid out like a criminal conspiracy. Bob admitted they weren't real security that Catherine paid them from embezzled funds, and that she'd specifically told them to handle residents who questioned her authority. "This is better than gold," Finn said, copying the files and backing them up in 3 different locations. "But we need to be strategic about how we use this." Savannah smiled with the confidence of someone who had been documenting Catherine's crimes for months. "Actually, I have been strategic. My grandfather taught me that people like Catherine always confess their crimes when they think nobody's listening." She pulled out a 3rd recording device. This is Catherine admitting to forging HOA documents and stealing money from the Community Repair Fund. In the recording, Catherine's voice was clear and slightly slurred from wine. "I just signed Peterson's name to whatever I want. Who's going to check the old man's been drooling in assisted living for months and nobody talks to him anyway? Paying those 2 morons $200 each from the fund keeps them loyal." Grayson whistled with professional appreciation. "That's fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and elder abuse. She's looking at decades in prison." Looking back, I should have realized that having this much evidence meant Catherine was already finished, but at the time I was worried she might have an escape plan we hadn't considered. That afternoon, Randy showed up at our door looking like he hadn't slept in days or showered in just as long. I opened it to find him shaking and sweating, like someone going through withdrawal. "Josh, I need to talk to you about your grandfather." His voice was barely above a whisper. "About what exactly?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what he wanted to talk about. "About what we did to him. I never wanted this to happen. Catherine manipulated me into thinking we had real authority." I looked at this big man who had seemed so intimidating with Catherine, backing him up now reduced to begging on my doorstep like a scared child. "So, why are you here now?" Randy's hands were shaking as he tried to explain. "I want to make it right. I'll testify against Catherine. I'll tell the court everything about the fake HOA's enforcement and the money she's been stealing." Phoenix leaned in, his voice sharp. "Randy's about to crack. We need to push him now before Catherine does." Phoenix appeared behind me like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. "That's interesting. Tell us more." I wasn't sure if Randy was genuinely sorry or just scared of going to prison, but his information was about to make our case ironclad. The way he kept looking over his shoulder suggested Catherine had no idea he was here. Randy spilled everything once he started talking like a dam had burst, and all his guilt came flooding out at once. Catherine had been running the HOA like her personal kingdom for 8 months, ever since the real president had moved to assisted living. She'd been forging Peterson's signature on violation notices, embezzling money from the community fund, and paying Randy and Bob to intimidate residents who questioned her authority. She always said we were protecting property values and maintaining community standards, but really, we were just enforcing her control-freak rules so she could feel powerful, Randy admitted with shame in his voice. She told us the homeowners association gave us legal authority to enforce compliance, but we were never real security officers. Phoenix took notes while Randy talked, occasionally asking questions that made Randy admit to more crimes than he probably intended. "Did Catherine ever specifically tell you to use physical force?" "She said to handle situations however necessary to maintain compliance. When people didn't listen to warnings, she expected us to escalate. I actually had to stop and process that, because escalate sounded like military terminology, not HOA enforcement language. Catherine had been playing war games with people's lives. Meanwhile, Bob was having a complete breakdown that was visible to the entire neighborhood. Guilt had consumed him so completely that he had stopped eating, stopped showering, and stopped showing up for Catherine's enforcement activities. When Catherine called his phone, he let it go straight to voicemail every time. Phoenix had been monitoring their communications and saw an opportunity to push Bob over the edge completely. He called Bob from an untraceable number, using a voice that sounded official and terrifying. "This is Attorney Johnson from Miller Legal Services. We represent Frank Miller, the elderly veteran you assaulted. We know you've been impersonating law enforcement officers and assaulting residents under false authority. Turn yourself into the police within 24 hours, and we might recommend leniency to the prosecutor." Bob broke down completely on the phone, sobbing like a child who had been caught doing something terrible. "I'll do anything you want. I just want this nightmare to end. I never wanted to hurt anyone." Maybe I should have felt sorry for Bob. I don't know, but he'd broken my grandfather's arm for $200, so my sympathy was pretty limited. At least he seemed to have some conscience left, unlike Catherine. When Catherine tried to call her enforcement team for another property inspection the next day, neither Randy nor Bob answered their phones. She was completely alone for the first time since moving to our neighborhood, and the panic in her voice was obvious even from across the street. Catherine was visibly cracking. She called the police in desperation, but when they didn't listen, she lashed out at the community, accusing everyone of betraying her. Catherine was no longer the confident, intimidating figure she once was. Neighbors who had once cowered now stood up to her. Her eyes darted around, calculating her next move, but the fear in her voice was undeniable. She drove to Randy's house first, pounding on the door like police serving a warrant. "Randy, I know you're in there. We had a deal. You can't just abandon me now." No answer. She called Bob's phone 27 times in 1 hour. Every call went straight to voicemail. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, Catherine began to understand that she had no real power, no real authority, and no real friends. Just fake documents, stolen money, and 2 accomplices who were ready to throw her under the bus to save themselves. Savannah knocked on our door that evening with news that made everything even better. Catherine just tried to break into Randy's house through his back door. When that didn't work, she started screaming threats at his windows. I think she's completely lost it. I wasn't sure if I should feel triumphant or worried about what a desperate Catherine might do next. Desperation makes people dangerous. That night, I saw Catherine's wild eyes through my bedroom window as she stood in her driveway at midnight. Just as I thought Catherine was slipping away, Savannah knocked on our door, her eyes gleaming with a secret. "I think you'll want to hear this," she said, holding her phone out to me. What she played next would change everything. Grayson arranged an emergency HOA meeting for the following Saturday, properly authorized by Mr. Peterson, the real president who'd returned from assisted living specifically to deal with Catherine's fraud. I wasn't sure if Peterson would actually show up, since he was 82 years old and had been dealing with health issues, but he arrived early and looked determined to clean up the mess Catherine had made of his neighborhood. The community center was packed with residents who wanted answers about the crazy rules, the fake enforcement officers, and why their HOA fees had been disappearing without any improvements to common areas. Everyone wanted to know what the hell had been happening for the past 8 months while they had been living in fear. Catherine arrived looking disheveled and paranoid, with Randy and Bob nowhere to be seen because they'd both lawyered up and were cooperating with police. She tried to take control of the meeting like she'd been doing for months. "This meeting is unauthorized. I'm the HOA president, and I didn't approve this gathering." Mr. Peterson stood up slowly, using his walker, but speaking with clear authority. "Actually, Catherine, I'm still the president. I never resigned, and I certainly never authorized you to sign my name to anything." The room went completely silent as residents processed what they'd just heard. You could have heard a pin drop. Catherine's face drained of color faster than water down a drain. "That's not right. I was acting in your absence to maintain community standards." Peterson's voice got stronger as he spoke. "Acting without authorization is called fraud, Catherine. And signing someone else's name to legal documents is called forgery." Savannah requested permission to address the meeting, and Peterson nodded his approval. "I think everyone deserves to know what's really been happening in our neighborhood for the past 8 months. Finn had set up a projector connected to his laptop, and the first thing displayed was a comparison between Peterson's real signature and Catherine's forgeries on dozens of violation notices. "Catherine has been forging Mr. Peterson's signature for 8 months, Savannah announced to a room full of shocked neighbors. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people recognized violation notices they'd received with fake signatures. Next, Finn played Bob's recorded confession about being paid to play fake HOA security officers. The murmurs turned to shocked whispers as residents realized they'd been intimidated by fake authority. Then came Catherine's own recorded admission about embezzling HOA funds and forging documents. I actually had to watch Catherine's face during this part because her expression went from defensive to panicked to completely defeated in about 30 seconds. It was like watching someone's entire world collapse in real time. The moment Catherine realized the truth was out, the room exploded. Neighbors who had feared her for months stood united, their voices rising in fury. She was done, and the real war had just begun. People were standing up, shouting questions, demanding to know how much money she'd stolen and what other lies she'd told them. Catherine jumped up like she was going to run, but there were too many people between her and the exits. "Those recordings are illegal. You can't use those against me in a community meeting." Grayson stood with military bearing and spoke in his command voice. "Actually, in Texas, single-party consent means these recordings are perfectly legal evidence in both civil and criminal proceedings." Catherine realized she'd just made everything worse by challenging the legality of evidence that proved her crimes. Phoenix had been waiting for this moment, and he addressed the room with the psychological insight that made him so effective at his job. Catherine has been using fear and fake authority to control this community while stealing your money and forging legal documents. The question isn't whether she's guilty. The question is how many other neighborhoods she's planning to target next if we don't stop her here. I wasn't sure if Phoenix was right about Catherine targeting other neighborhoods, but the way she looked around the room, like a trapped animal, suggested she definitely thought about expanding her fake HOA empire. At the meeting, Catherine's mask finally cracked. Her attempts to explain her actions only exposed her lies further. The crowd grew angrier, and Catherine's desperate words couldn't save her anymore. She completely lost control of her emotions and started screaming at the room full of neighbors who'd been afraid of her for months. "You people don't understand what I did for this neighborhood. Property values were dropping, houses looked like garbage. Someone had to maintain standards and enforce rules. By assaulting elderly veterans," an elderly neighbor called out from the back of the room. Catherine's response proved she'd learned nothing from this experience. "That was an accident. Randy got too aggressive when that old man refused to comply with HOA regulations." "So you admit you directed Randy to use force against residents who questioned your fake authority?" Grayson asked, in the tone he probably used to interrogate suspects overseas. Catherine realized she'd just confessed to conspiracy and assault in front of 50 witnesses. "I didn't mean it like that. I never told them to hurt anyone." But the damage was done, and everyone in the room heard her admit to directing fake security officers to use force against residents. The community that had feared Catherine for months now saw her as she really was, a petty tyrant who had hurt innocent people to feed her own ego and steal their money. Looking back, I think that moment, when the entire neighborhood turned against her, was when Catherine finally understood how completely she'd destroyed her own life. One by one, neighbors stood up to tell their own stories of Catherine's abuse and fraud. An elderly neighbor had been fined $300 for painting her fence the wrong shade of white, even though she'd used standard exterior paint from Home Depot. A man with a work truck had been threatened with legal action for parking it in his own driveway because Catherine claimed commercial vehicles violated HOA covenants that didn't actually exist. A family with young children had been harassed for having too many holiday decorations, which turned out to be a normal amount of Christmas lights that Catherine personally didn't like. Every story painted the same picture. Catherine had been terrorizing residents for months, stealing their money through fake fines, and using fake authority to control their lives. The crowd was no longer scared of Catherine. They were angry, and rightfully so. Catherine backed toward the exit as more stories came out, panic clear in her voice. "You people have no idea what you've done. This neighborhood needs someone strong to lead it. Without proper enforcement, everything will fall apart." Just as we thought we had her, Catherine vanished her car, abandoned her life on the run. The real war was just beginning. By the time the police arrived, Catherine had disappeared. Her car was found, but she was gone, fleeing like a coward. It was clear this wasn't the end, but the start of her final downfall. Detective Martinez led the team, and she reviewed our evidence with professional efficiency. Randy had already turned himself in that morning and was cooperating fully with the investigation. Bob had surrendered the previous evening and was providing detailed testimony about Catherine's fake HOA operation. "This is one of the most complete fraud cases I've seen in 20 years. Detective Martinez told us as she reviewed Savannah's recordings and Randy's confession. Forgery, embezzlement, assault on an elderly person, impersonating public officials, and conspiracy. Catherine's looking at serious prison time. But Catherine had disappeared from the meeting and wasn't at her house when police went to arrest her. They found her car abandoned at North Park Shopping Mall, with the engine still running and her purse on the front seat. She'd emptied her checking account from an ATM and was trying to flee Texas with about $3,000 in cash. I wasn't sure if Catherine was smart enough to actually escape, or if she was just panicking and making everything worse for herself. Turned out it was definitely the latter. The police were closing in. But when they got to the motel, Catherine had already vanished into thin air. The chase had just begun. The hunt for Catherine escalated. 2 days later, the police tracked her to a rundown motel in Tulsa, where she had tried to disappear under a fake name. But Catherine's luck had run out. They found her at a rundown motel in Tulsa, registered under the fake name Sarah Williams, which wasn't even creative enough to fool a motel clerk who'd been watching the news about her case. She was arrested as she tried to check out with a duffel bag full of cash and fake identification documents she'd apparently made herself using a home printer and laminator. When Catherine was arrested, she was a shell of the woman who had ruled the neighborhood with fear. She looked small, defeated, stripped of everything she once held dear. Her reign of terror was over. When they brought her back to Texas in handcuffs, she looked nothing like the confident HOA tyrant who had terrorized our neighborhood for months. She looked small, scared, and completely defeated by the consequences of her own actions. The local news covered her arrest with the headline, "Fake HOA, President Arrested for Fraud and Assault." And I have to admit, seeing Catherine's mugshot on television felt like the first real victory we'd gotten since this nightmare started. Maybe I should have felt sorry for her, I don't know, but she'd broken my grandfather's arm over a fake parking violation and then threatened him in a text message. My sympathy tank was completely empty when it came to Catherine. The trial was swift because Catherine's lawyers couldn't argue against recorded confessions, financial records, and testimony from her own accomplices. Randy testified for the prosecution as part of his plea agreement. Catherine told us we were official HOA enforcement officers with legal authority to compel compliance. She said the Homeowners Association gave us power to fine residents and use physical force if necessary. Bob broke down on the witness stand when he described assaulting Grandpa Frank. What I did was wrong, and I knew it was wrong when I did it. Frank Miller didn't deserve to get hurt. Catherine paid us each $200 a month from money she stole from the community, but no amount of money was worth hurting an innocent man. The prosecutor laid out the charges with methodical precision. Catherine Williams systematically defrauded this community for 8 months. She forged official documents, embezzled over $6,000 in HOA funds, created fake enforcement officers, and directed them to use violence against residents who questioned her authority. I've told revenge stories on Justice Stories channel before, but I'd never seen anyone destroy themselves as completely as Catherine had with her own greed and cruelty. It was like watching someone dig their own grave and then jump in voluntarily. As Judge Harrison prepared to announce sentencing, Catherine suddenly stood up and interrupted the proceedings. "Your Honor, this is all a misunderstanding. These people are trying to destroy me because I maintained community standards that they were too lazy to follow." The judge looked unimpressed by Catherine's outburst. "Ms. Williams, you've been found guilty on all counts by a jury of your peers. The evidence against you is overwhelming and includes your own recorded admissions." Catherine's composure finally cracked completely, and she started screaming at the judge like she was still the fake HOA president. "Fine. You want to know the truth? This neighborhood was complete garbage before I took control. These people are lazy and weak and needed someone strong to make them follow rules." She pointed directly at Grandpa Frank, who was sitting in the front row with his cast finally removed. "And that old man got exactly what he deserved for defying my authority." Security officers stepped forward as Catherine continued her rant, but she wasn't finished destroying herself yet. "If I'm going to prison, I'll make sure that old man pays for ruining my life." I actually had to stop and stare, because I couldn't believe she was threatening my grandfather in open court. The audacity was mind-blowing. Catherine lunged toward Grandpa Frank with something metal in her hand that she'd somehow smuggled past courthouse security. It looked like a small knife, or maybe a sharpened piece of jewelry. Grayson reacted instantly with military reflexes, jumping between Catherine and Grandpa Frank before I even understood what was happening. The blade caught Grayson's forearm, drawing blood and tearing his shirt, but he didn't let Catherine reach our grandfather. Bailiffs swarmed Catherine, wrestling her to the ground as she screamed threats and curses that I won't repeat here. "He ruined everything I built, everything I worked for. He deserves to pay." As Catherine was dragged away in handcuffs, still screaming about revenge and destruction, Judge Harrison called for order in his courtroom. Given this outburst, this threat, and this attempted assault with a deadly weapon in my courtroom, I'm adding attempted murder and contempt of court to the charges. Ms. Williams, you've just guaranteed yourself the maximum sentence possible under Texas law. Now, looking back, I think Catherine's final meltdown in court was the moment when everyone understood just how dangerous and unstable she'd been while running her fake HOA operation. Detective Martinez's words were a blow to Catherine's hope. "This is one of the most airtight fraud cases we've ever seen." But even as she was carted off, I couldn't shake the feeling that Catherine wasn't done yet. Catherine's sentence was handed down 25 years. The neighborhood's funds were restored, and justice was finally served. But it wasn't the verdict that mattered most. It was the quiet peace that followed. 2 weeks later, Judge Harrison announced sentences that felt like complete victory for everyone Catherine had hurt. Catherine received 25 years in state prison for fraud, embezzlement, assault, attempted murder, and contempt of court. She would also pay $37,000 in restitution to the community and to Grandpa Frank personally. 25 years meant Catherine would be 75 years old before she could even apply for parole, assuming she survived prison and learned to follow rules instead of making them up. Randy got 3 years in minimum security prison with possibility of parole in 18 months, plus community service and $5,000 in fines. His cooperation with the investigation and genuine remorse had earned him the lightest sentence possible. Bob received 2 years in minimum security prison and $3,000 in fines, and he'd already started serving his time by helping elderly residents in the neighborhood with yard work and home repairs as part of his pre-sentencing community service. Detective Martinez told us after the sentencing, "In 20 years of police work, I've never seen someone destroy their life so completely over such petty control issues." Catherine had a decent job, a nice house, and a normal life before she decided to play dictator with your HOA. Our lawyer also won the civil lawsuit against Catherine's assets, which meant additional compensation beyond the criminal restitution. Catherine's house was sold to pay damages $20,000 for Grandpa Frank's medical bills, pain and suffering, and legal fees, plus another $15,000 to restore the HOA fund and compensate neighbors who'd been illegally fined. The HOA fund was completely restored with interest, and Mr. Peterson immediately repealed all of Catherine's fake rules while apologizing personally to every resident who'd been harassed or fined. A homeowners association should help maintain property values and community spirit, Peterson announced at the first legitimate HOA meeting in months. It should never be used to terrorize residents or steal their money. Peterson also established new oversight rules to prevent anyone from forging his signature or embezzling funds in the future. I wasn't sure if new rules would stop the next Catherine from trying to take over, but at least our neighborhood had learned to question authority that seemed too aggressive or too controlling. As the community gathered to celebrate, there was a sense of freedom in the air. We had reclaimed what was ours, and for the first time in months, I could breathe easy again. The nightmare was over. The neighborhood organized a block party to celebrate Catherine's conviction and to rebuild the community spirit she'd destroyed with months of fear and fake authority. For the first time since Catherine moved to our street, people felt comfortable walking around their own neighborhood without worrying about fake violation notices or harassment from fake security officers. Grandpa Frank, standing tall as ever, was the true guest of honor. His arm healed, but the scars of that day would never fade. But now he was free. We were all free. Neighbors who had been afraid to talk to each other for months were now sharing food stories and laughter like a real community should. An elderly neighbor brought homemade dumplings and thanked Grandpa Frank for standing up to Catherine when everyone else was too scared. A man with a work truck grilled burgers for everyone and told stories about how Catherine had tried to fine him for having grass that was 2.1 inches tall instead of the required 2 inches maximum. A family with young children had their kids running around playing games with other neighborhood children, and their house was decorated with normal Christmas lights that Catherine would have called excessive, but no longer mattered because Catherine was in prison where she belonged. Grayson's arm had healed with just a small scar that he wore proudly as proof that he had protected family when it mattered most. Got this scar protecting Grandpa Frank from a crazy person with a knife. Best scar I ever earned, he told everyone at the block party. The 3 Army cousins had extended their leave to help with the legal proceedings, but more importantly, to spend time with Grandpa Frank and make sure he'd fully recovered from Catherine's assault. "You know what I learned from this whole experience?" Phoenix said as we sat on the front porch watching neighborhood kids play in the street without fear of fake HOA violations. Real strength isn't about controlling people or making them afraid of you. It's about protecting the people you love from bullies who think power means hurting innocent people. Finn nodded while monitoring news coverage of Catherine's kiss on his laptop. Catherine thought power came from fear and fake authority. But look around our neighborhood now. This community is stronger than it ever was under her rules because people aren't afraid anymore. Grayson raised his beer in a toast. To Frank Miller, who taught us that dignity and integrity matter more than compliance with fake rules made up by power-hungry bullies. As I watched Grandpa Frank teaching neighborhood kids how to properly maintain their bicycles in our driveway, the same driveway Catherine had claimed was improperly used for non-residential activities, I realized this experience had fundamentally changed how I understood justice and community. 6 months earlier, when Catherine first hurt Grandpa Frank, I'd wanted immediate revenge that would make her suffer the way she'd made him suffer. But my army cousins taught me something more valuable than revenge. Justice isn't about hurting people who hurt you. Justice is about truth consequences and protecting innocent people from bullies who think they can abuse others without facing accountability. Catherine destroyed herself with her own greed, cruelty, and desperate need for control over other people's lives. We just made sure the truth came to light and that she faced appropriate consequences for her crimes. A year later, our neighborhood is thriving in ways it never did under Catherine's fake authority. Property values have actually increased because people want to live in a community known for standing up to bullies and supporting each other instead of living in fear. Catherine is serving her sentence in state prison, learning what real authority and real rules actually look like. Randy and Bob have both been released and are doing community service, helping elderly residents with yard work and home maintenance as a way to make amends for the harm they caused while working for Catherine. The house Catherine used to live in was bought by a young family with 2 kids who quickly became neighborhood favorites, hosting cookouts and letting other kids play in their backyard. As I finish this story, Grandpa Frank is teaching those same kids how to change the oil in their bicycles using our garage. The same garage Catherine once claimed violated HOA regulations that didn't exist. Sometimes people ask if I feel bad about what happened to Catherine, or if 25 years in prison was too harsh. The answer is absolutely not. She had choices at every step. She chose to lie, steal, and hurt innocent people. After all her lies and manipulation, Catherine's fake empire collapsed. Maybe the real lesson here is no matter how much power you think you have, messing with the wrong people always comes back to haunt you.
You watched it. You felt it. Now share it with someone who loves drama even more than you. That's the QA Stories way.